Good evening. I'm Monika, and I know you're wondering, yes, my mom did sew that dress for me by hand. I'm very lucky. She's very talented. For my first year project, I served as co-investigator on the Effortless Assessment of Stressful Experiences, or EASE, study. In the EASE study, we aimed to test whether data collected via passive mobile sensing would correlate with known indices of stress. Okay? And to do that, to investigate that question about stress, we used the academic stress paradigm. Now, the academic stress paradigm looks like this, or it looked like this when we did it, and this is usually how it looks. So, you recruit a bunch of students. You find out a week, well, what we did is we found out a week when they didn't have any big assignments due and when they didn't have any big exams. Okay, and we called that their low stress week. They came in at the beginning of their low stress week and they installed our software, which I'll tell you about more in a second. They installed our software on their mobile phone with their fully informed consent. They left it on their phone for the duration of the week, used their phone as normal, then came in at the end of the week, uninstalled software, and filled out a bunch of questionnaires. For my purposes, we'll talk most about the questionnaire called the DAS 42, the Depression, Anxiety, and Stress Scale. Critically, they then came back in several weeks later for the 7 days leading up to their last final exam. Okay? And we conceptualized that as a high stress week. Same protocol came in, installed the software, used their phone as normal, 7 days, came back in, uninstalled, did some questionnaires, including the DAS, and we rocked and rolled from there. So I mentioned that what we were really interested in here was data collected via passive mobile sensing. Now, what does that mean? We're trying to come up with a better term, because passive mobile sensing doesn't mean anything. But what it means for us is we developed this tool called the EARS tool. Okay? And what it does is it lives on your phone, and it collects multiple indices of observational behavioral data, right? I can answer questions about that again, talk more about it when we're drinking beer later. But for my purposes, what I focused on was a video diary component. Well, it's a little bit contradicts what I just said, right? Because video diaries require you to shoot video of yourself. That's not passive, is it? But this was a pilot study, and we used those video diaries to kind of serve as a bridge between, coming into the lab and shooting a video, and eventually our passive method will be something called a selfie scraper, which I'll also tell you about later. But for these purposes, the video diary was kind of an intermediate step. That video diary, the task was pretty straightforward. In the evenings, they got a notification on their phone to shoot a video diary. They opened up the app, and they talked for 1 to 2 minutes, depending on how compliant they were, about a positive thing that happened to them that day, a negative thing that happened to them that day, the weather thing, yeah, and that was it. So for our purposes, we're going to focus on these video diaries, and even to narrow it down more, we're going to focus on facial expressions within those video diaries, okay? Ask a question about whether facial expressions predict those self-reported measures of depression, anxiety, and stress. So let's talk about facial expressions for a second. There are two kind of dominant schools of thought in the facial expression literature. One originated by a fellow named Paul Ekman, who doesn't look like that. But he advanced a school of thought that your facial expressions are an accurate readout of your emotional state. Okay? He was also one of the founding thinkers behind kind of the principle of basic emotions, that there are 6 basic emotions that humans feel, etc. But he really promulgated this idea that your face reads out the emotions that you're genuinely feeling. Now, in a bit of academic drama, Paul Ekman was publicly contradicted by his student, Alan Fridland. And Dr. Fridland advanced the notion that, in fact, facial expressions are communicative, that they are a way of soliciting what you need from the people around you, and that they're in fact quite social and not necessarily a readout of your internal emotional state. Okay, so for our purposes, for the hypothesis I'm going to tell you about in a minute. We are going to stick with this big burly fellow on the left. We'll see how that goes for you, for us. So, facial expressions, super complicated. Lots of stuff going on faces. How do you analyze a facial expression? Well, the gold standard generally is to use something called FACS, the facial action coding system, which breaks down a facial expression into a bunch of little action units. An action unit is basically like the smallest component part of facial expression. So a good example of an action unit is, for example, AU6 is the cheek raiser. Okay, so that's when your cheeks kind of encroach on the underside of your eye, right? Like Dr. Hodges is giving me a nice cheek raiser. Thank you very much. And for our purposes, we are going to be talking a lot about AU12, okay? And that is the classic smile. That's the upturned corners of the mouth, okay? So, historically, it's an incredibly onerous task to do FACS, right? Because you have to watch the video, you have manual coders who go through extensive training, when they sit in front of a computer screen, and first they look at just your eyes, and then they look at just the middle of your face. And it's like hours upon hours of work. Thank goodness for me, and not wanting to do that, there have been really remarkable advances in automated facial expression analysis. And we elected to use a piece of software called OpenFace. This is an OpenFace demo featuring the lovely Dr. Byrne. You can see that it places a map of points. It detects her smiles. It detects her frowns. Her brows are going to go up, thank you. Brows are going to go back down. And this is just a demo, right? This, in fact, generates an unbelievably rich output of data, indexing like 20 AUs, and head pose and eye gaze and all sorts of cool stuff. So, had to narrow that down too, because I can't do all of that for an FYP. So, what we ended up focusing on, like I sort of spoiled this already, but we focused on smiles, okay? Why did we focus on smiles? So, lest I be accused of being cheeky, I'll explain this a little bit. We're going to talk a lot about how they have lots of meaning later on in the talk. But the part about them being easy to detect is especially prominent in these automated facial analysis approaches. Because when you have video of people's faces across almost all contexts, that AU12, smile, is the most common AU. The most common facial expression is a neutral face, but the most common AU is a smile, which means that when you're using machine learning to train these algorithms, they are seeing more smiles, right? And the algorithms are getting better and better at detecting smiles. So for our purposes, the most reliable AU to detect is going to be AU12. So, we're looking at smiles, we're talking about anxiety and stress, and we are aligning ourselves with Dr. Ekman and the notion that your face is going to be a readout of your internal emotional state. And so we hypothesized that in the high stress week, people would, compared to the low stress week, they would smile less, and they would report being more anxious. Right? Like, duh, right? Okay. So good news! Exciting! Oh, see those asterisks? So we found, just in our very preliminary analyses, we found that people did smile less, significantly less, in the high stress week, and they did report higher anxiety in the high stress week. Okay, awesome, right? Like, I'm rolling. Like, I got this going, right? It's all working out exactly how I expect. So the big question is, do the changes in those things correlate with each other, right? Does the change in the smiling behavior tell us how that anxiety measure is going to change? Well, we ran that analysis, and I was super optimistic. Nothing! And not even like trending. Nothing! Dang, shoot, okay. So what's going on here? What happened? So we took a step back. And our academic stress paradigm worked. It didn't have a super powerful kind of effect on people's self-reported stress. We collapsed across weeks. And we thought, okay, let's look and see what this relationship really is, right, between smiling and anxiety. What does that say? Does that say as people smile more, they report more anxiety? Okay, so what's going on here? If we go back to my favorite slide, you remember that there are these dueling theories about what facial expressions are for, right? And Ekman gave us our hypothesis, but maybe we picked the wrong pugilist, right? Like, maybe the idea here is in fact that it's totally plausible that these people doing this task, who might have been more anxious, might have been smiling in a kind of affiliative way, in a kind of soliciting, smiling back kind of way, right? So maybe that's what's going on. It's also really important to remember that smiles are super complicated. I said they have lots of meaning, and they really do. A super recent paper. This is kind of in Dr. Fridland's framework. Researchers have broken down smiles into these different categories that are found really reliably when you have people rate smiles and kind of what they're for. We have, a reward smile, which is kind of like a Duchenne smile, right? A genuinely felt smile. The affiliative smile, when you're kind of soliciting, trying to get someone to smile back at you. And that dominant smile, right? The sneer, okay? And we actually don't have enough, the automated software didn't turn out enough AUs for us to distinguish between these different types of smiles. So there might be something going on there too. And then, significantly, right, there are demand characteristics of the video diary task, right? Not only are they're recording the videos, they know the videos are coming to us, right? But also when they're recording the videos, they can see themselves, right? So there's kind of a twin thing operating here of the demand characteristics of being involved, involved in this study. You're shooting these videos for researchers who are going to judge you, right? Not really, but and then also this sort of objective self-awareness theory, which gets at the idea that when you can see yourself, you tend to compare yourself to your own standards, right? Which might make us think that maybe that would affect smiling behavior also. Lots of possible stuff going on here. So, in terms of future directions, one finding that I'm just going to introduce to you because I thought it was cool. You guys can have opinions about it if you want. Is this question of general expressivity. Maybe focusing on one AU really loses the story. Because when you plot AU change across weeks, this is something like 20 AUs, and every single one of them either stays flat or goes down in that high stress week. So maybe there's a story there to be figured out. We're also planning to compare the automated output to the manual fax coding that's happening over in Pittsburgh. And with our colleagues are doing that, it's not just happening in Pittsburgh. And then really importantly, I mentioned this earlier, the idea of the selfie scraper, okay? Our tool, the ears tool, we've transitioned it over to a new method of collecting facial expressions, which is that we're able to collect all of the selfies that an individual participating in our study, with their full informed consent, we can collect their selfies, and that those selfies might give us different information than these video diaries, right? That's not to say they won't be constrained by social desirability or by other factors that we have to sort of account for, but we would like to see if this relationship holds with that method of data collection instead. That bullet was supposed to be a bonus anyway. And so that's the thing, is that these facial expressions are really complicated, and they're really influenced by social context, by what a person wants and what they're going after, and these stories are really complex, and the data we get from passive mobile sensing is super complex. And what we're really hopeful for is that the story that smiles tell, sort of incomplete and confusing as it might be clarified once we go multimodal, right? And once we bring in the different streams of data that the ears tool collects. We're super excited about that possibility. I want to thank a bunch of really awesome people. And then I want to answer your questions.